We are in a very crucial time of fantasy football. Bye weeks are just around the corner. There are a ton of huge injuries. So now is the perfect time to stay one step ahead of everybody else and stash some players on our bench that can return an insane amount of value in the coming weeks. And that is exactly what I'm going to give you guys in this video right now. And make sure to stick around to the end because I'll be giving you guys a list of very, very good handcuff running backs that need to be rostered as soon as possible in the fantasy league you're in right now. Make sure to hit that like button as we get into this video. The like goal is right here. It would mean a ton to me as a person and as a creator, and subscribe if you do like this video as well. But the number one guy we should be stashing this week is Jalen Tolbert, and his value is only going to get higher as the season goes on. But I'd suggest stashing him as soon as you can, sooner than later, because in week 1 he saw 67% of the snaps, but that was in a blowout where the Cowboys put up 30 points in 3 quarters. Then in week 2, he follows that up with 86% of the snaps and 75% of the snaps in week 3. He's making a very good case to be that wide receiver 2 for the rest of the year over a 30-year-old Brandon Cooks, which I guarantee is going to happen at some point in the season. And he's averaging 10 fantasy points a game through 3 weeks in a Cowboys offense that has a pretty lackluster run game. So if you can't get the run game going, you're going to have to lean on the pass, and that's exactly what they've been doing. The Cowboys are number 1 in passing attempts, number 1 in passing yards, 9th in overall passing offense. As he keeps increasing his snaps and getting more trust from Dak Prescott, he's going to be very, very valuable, and he has an easy schedule as far as fantasy points allowed to opposing wide receivers for the rest of the season, so you're going to want to get him now. We also need to go out and stash another wide receiver, Josh Downs, who just had his first game back from injury, putting up 5.2 fantasy points this week. But those 5.2 fantasy points are going to keep him under the radar to where we can stash him and not have to worry about other people taking him from us. Anthony Richardson has not looked great. We do have to remember he's played less than a full NFL season. Through 3 weeks of this season, he's completing less than 50% of his passes. That is not good. But with that being said, this offense is only going to improve as Anthony Richardson plays more football. Is he going to be Patrick Mahomes level? No, but definitely better than what he is right now as a boom or bust passer, which is making all of these other fantasy wide receivers in this offense boom or bust. But when we look at that, Josh Downs will relatively be less of that kind of guy. He played 70% of his snaps in the slot last year, and this guy had 5 targets while only playing 57% of the snaps in the first week he was back from a very major injury. Those are really good underlying numbers. As he gets more healthy, he sees a higher snap percentage. He's going to be a locked and loaded wide receiver 2 in this offense. He really isn't competing with anybody outside of Michael Pittman. Alec Pierce and A.D. Mitchell are competing for that 3. They have a similar play style. Another wide receiver we need to go through and stash is really this Rams wide receiver core in general. Which one are we going to get? That's the question. And the main overarching fact is that we don't have Puka, we don't have Cooper Kupp for another 4-ish weeks. That's a big amount of time. That's almost a month with no wide receiver 1 in this offense. Someone has to emerge as that. And here are our options. Number 1, Demarcus Robinson, who had 1 catch for 32 yards, 93% of the snaps. Tyler Johnson, 3 catches for 20 yards, 50% of the snaps. We have Jordan Whittington, 3 catches, 28 yards, 38% of the snaps, and Tutu Atwell with 4 catches, 93 yards, and 74% of the snaps. So as you can see, this wide receiver core and the depth chart of these guys is still very underdeveloped. And if we're being honest, I don't think there's going to be a true alpha wide receiver 1 like a Cooper Kupp or like a Puka. The top guys we're going to want from this offense moving forward is going to be Demarcus Robinson, number 1, and Tutu Atwell is going to be my number 2. And here's why. They both saw a good amount of snaps in this 49ers matchup last week, which is a pretty tough one. And the Rams have 3 of their offensive linemen on IR and have a whole bunch of injuries on that side of the ball. But what that means is that the Rams have no choice but to lean more on the short to intermediate pass game if Matthew Stafford can't have the time to drop back and pass and go through all of his reads in his first progression. So then that leads us to the thought process of who is this slot wide receiver. And if we're looking at last week, that man is Demarcus Robinson. You're going to want to get him number 1 out of all of these guys, because if you're in the slot, you statistically have a higher target share. You see more targets because you're there, you're quick, you're next to the line, and you're typically number 1 in first read targets of where the quarterback is looking when he drops back. Demarcus Robinson saw 37 slot snaps last week. That's going to make him a more predictable guy. He saw 4 targets even though he only caught 1 of them. He is going to be my number 1 option, but now that the waivers have cleared, he is rostered in a good amount of leagues. So Tutu Atwell is going to be my number 2 option here. He has a lot of usage in this offense. He's been filling in for Cooper Kupp and Puka before. But again, try to get your hands on somebody in this offense. Jordan Whittington would be my number 3 option. The rookie wide receiver, he could make some noise here. But another guy we need to be stashing. You know I don't like the Bears offense. I don't like the competition. I really don't like their offensive line. But Roschon Johnson is a guy that we need to be considering to stash on our bench. At the very least, he could be trade bait in one of the moves that you end up making later in the line of the season. The reason I say this is because DeAndre Swift's usage in a Bears offense that isn't already very run heavy is tanking. He's only seeing half the carries, half the targets. He's lost his red zone role at this point. But let's look at the splits here between Roschon Johnson and DeAndre Swift to really understand what's going on here. Last week, Roschon Johnson, 37% of the snaps, 8 carries, 5 targets. DeAndre Swift, 53% of the snaps, that is good. 13 carries, 4 targets. It might not look that bad, but Caleb Williams did have 52 pass attempts, so everything's a little bit skewed. But this showed us that Swift isn't going to have as big of a role in this offense as we expected him to. I mean, the entirety of the season, he hasn't averaged more than 70% of the snaps. What really makes this bad and is an underlying depiction of these numbers is that DeAndre Swift only saw 1 out of the 5 goal line attempts last week. And the one he did see, he ran for negative 12 yards. Now, that's more of an offensive line issue. It was terrible. And some of you might be saying, we still have Khalil Herbert in this offense. What are we talking about? Well, we look at Khalil Herbert last week. He saw 10% of the snaps, only 4 touches. He's not going to be involved here. And we saw in the back half of last season that Roschon was giving him a run for his money for the starting job before DeAndre Swift was here. So it's pretty evident that Roschon Johnson is that RB2. And if Swift were to ever get injured, he's going to have a good role in the pass game as well as the run game that does exist for the Bears. He's a great stash for now. But if Darnell Mooney is still on your waivers, please make sure he's one of your number 1 options here. If Kirk Cousins stays improving, which he probably will as he gets more acclimated into this offense, Darnell Mooney is going to be a great stash and honestly a borderline flex play for the rest of the season. He's had just about a 100% route participation rate through 3 weeks. He has 15 targets and 154 yards over his last 2 games, and the Falcons do have a pretty decent pass volume as well. They're not bad. They're not absolutely amazing either. Cousins is averaging about 27 pass attempts a game, which is good enough to support a bunch of guys in this offense. And Darnell Mooney's target share can't really be ignored. He saw a 24% team target share through the last 2 weeks. Looking at a tight end option to stash, I know pretty much all of them are bad. Even the top guys have not been performing, so maybe you do want to grab one of these lower level guys. It's going to be Ben Sinnott and maybe even Zach Ertz if you want a more short-term stash, because Jaden Daniels continues to live in the short to intermediate pass game. If you look at his pass chart, is in behind the line of scrimmage or right at the line of scrimmage or 5 yards between it, which is why Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler have been getting a good amount of usage, as well as the tight ends with Zach Ertz. He saw 4 targets for 62 yards in week 3. That was by far his best game with the Commanders here. But as Jaden Daniels gets more comfortable in this passing offense and they are not 30th in passing attempts, I don't expect that to continue. It's definitely going to be up from that. The value for Ertz will definitely grow. Now, he's going to be the more short-term guy. Ben Sinnott is the rookie tight end that they just drafted. He hasn't had enough of a snap share to really be an addable guy unless you're in a really, really deep league. But there is always that chance that Zach Ertz does get injured or miss some time because he is an older tight end, and Sinnott has been perfectly fine in preseason and in college. But this can't be a stash video if I don't talk about some really, really good handcuff running backs, so I will rapid fire all of these guys you need to make sure are already rostered. If not, put them on your team right now. Number 1 is going to be Braylon Allen, a guy that's probably not even on your waiver wire at this point because he's more of a complimentary back to Breece Hall than he is a handcuff. And with the amount of targets that go into this backfield between Breece and Braylon Allen, he is going to be perfectly fine all season and will be a plug-and-play RB1 if Breece does get injured. And that kind of is the mold for these prime handcuff RB1s. The next guy is going to be Bucky Irving, and he might just be the number 1 handcuff out of all of these guys, your number 1 option to go get. The coaching staff has come out and said that they want to get him more involved, and he's earned more touches in this backfield, which is very, very strong coming from coaches. But you can tell pretty easily if you look at this usage. Rachaad White has been very inefficient for the past 2 years. He was a very good running back last year because he had no other RB competition. He was still inefficient. There was just nobody else to take the usage. But now he does have Bucky Irving, who can catch passes, who has led this team in rushing yards 2 out of the last 3 weeks. I would get him on my roster now before somebody else does. Tyler Algier is another running back that does deserve to be on this list. One of these guys, if any, that has actually proven to be valuable before. In his rookie season, before the Bijan experience in 2022, he had a 1,000-yard rushing year. And he's been efficient with the touches that he's seen through 3 weeks. On 19 carries, he's had a 6-yard per carry mark. It's another situation where if Bijan goes down, he's going to be a plug-and-play RB1. There's nobody else in this backfield to take any type of usage, and that's what you want from these handcuffs. You want pass catchers, you want running backs that don't have a committee backfield if they get injured, as well as being on good offenses. And speaking of that, Kenneth Gainwell is going to be our next very good handcuff here. Saquon has had a ton of success because he's Saquon, but also because this Eagles offensive line is so good and they win a ton of games, or they're at least projected to for the rest of the season. Gainwell has also been on this offense for 4 years. He's filled in for other running backs before, and he can catch passes. But some other guys we need to stash, if these ones are taken for you, is going to be Trey Sermon, Tank Bigsby, and Antonio Gibson. Trey Sermon is a guy that's gotten every single touch out of this backfield that isn't Jonathan Taylor. You've seen him fill in for JT before when he was injured. He does have injury history. If that does happen, he's going to be a 1-for-1 plug and play that does get receiving work. And speaking of a guy that gets receiving work, Tank Bigsby is also in here. He's tied Travis Etienne in carries before this season. He's already getting more usage than a lot of people would have expected. And if Travis Etienne keeps fumbling or having these issues, he could get more and more usage. Another guy that's not necessarily only a handcuff, but if Etienne does get injured, he is that guy. And finally, Antonio Gibson, filling in for Ramondre Stevenson. He has been great, been very, very efficient on the touches he does get. The only drawback is that this offense isn't necessarily amazing, but his ability as a pass catcher alone is going to keep him as a top handcuff. Let me know if I missed any of the guys you are stashing on your bench, and I will be seeing you guys in the next video coming very soon.